everybody. This is the Joint Energy Committee, and we got some good speakers today. We're going to get to hear some interim proposals, studies, and hearing from the Curio company with some pretty interesting things concerning. I know that a lot of people in the committee are interested in what we've kind of came up with the phrase that we group them all into the new nuclear type thing, and I think Curio's certainly a player in that. So we'll just moving. Next thing on the agenda, as I mentioned earlier, the Curio company has been a player in the what we're calling the new nuclear field. They an interesting group, and I had a chance to visit their office, and when I was up in D.C., I was very impressed with their approach to the industry. It's unique, and I think it's something I wanted to have them down here so the committee could hear what their proposals are or what they're doing, and I think it'll be very informative, and we'll look forward to a lot of good questions afterwards. And with that, Mr. McGinnis, I invite you up, and please introduce yourself for the committee. And just push it. There you go.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me? Members of the committee, thank you very much.
You might want to move that mic.
Yeah, here we go. A little bit better.
That's better.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for your leadership. It's great to see what you all have already done to lay the groundwork for potential future expansion in the nuclear sector in a sustainable way, an economically robust way. You've got obviously a key nuclear power plant. Now, I'm going to introduce myself. So Ed McGinnis, I'm president and CEO of Curio. It's a nuclear technology innovation company, and I've been leading it for about 3 years. Prior to that, I served in the U.S. Department of Energy for about 30 years, including Assistant Secretary of Nuclear Energy for a number of years, and then at the White House. So now I'm trying to make a difference in the private sector, if nothing else for our next generation, to make sure they don't have the so-called nuclear waste problem around their shoulders. We know how to do this. We know how to do it technically, environmentally sustainable, so it's time to do it. And so that's another reason why we appreciated the work, the legislative efforts that this legislature in Little Rock has done. So thank you very much. Anytime, if you have any questions, let me know. Bottom line is, Curio is different from any other nuclear company in the U.S. from a couple of perspectives. Number one, we are looking to go into the nuclear market and through the back end, which is going through the recycling aspect of the nuclear market. We are also going to bring in an advanced small modular reactor and also advanced microreactors, but they're going to be fueled by the recycled fuel that we're going to extract when we recycle. And we're also going to be producing a plethora of isotopes that are dearly needed for medical, industrial, space-based power sources, all because of the value that is resident in the so-called nuclear waste. So what are we talking about? In the United States, we have the largest nuclear sector in the world. That means we have the largest amount of so-called nuclear waste. But that is not the case at all. Used nuclear fuel, whether it's Arkansas Nuclear 1 or other nuclear power plants in the country, you've got fuel that goes into a reactor fresh. It runs for about 5 years. When you pull it out, you've only used about 4% of that energy value. Leading scientists at Idaho National Lab have concluded that there's enough remaining energy value in our so-called nuclear waste sitting around the country, which is anything but waste, to meet the United States electricity needs for over 150 years. And that's not including the additional isotopes in elements, some they're rare earths or rare elements, precious metals, that are generated during that 5-year period where you cannot get the volumes or those types of materials anywhere else. So we're actually sitting on a national treasure trove of resources that only because of government policies going all the way back to President Carter, they've decided to sideline that material and just try and throw it away. When that material is unrecycled, you have material that's going to be unsafe according to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for over 100,000 years. If we recycle with our process, and I'll briefly explain what we're doing, we will only have about 3 to 4% of that original high-level radioactive material left, and it will only last for about 300 years only, relatively speaking, until it's safe for anybody to be around. Like I said, we know how to do it, and we know how to do it environmentally sustainable way, and also we want to make sure that nuclear can be fully accessed without states and local communities being saddled with this Faustian bargain of clean generation of electricity, but because we haven't brought a sensible and known way to recycle, that we're going to leave that for generations to come. So that's one reason why I left government, because I want to solve this issue. So how are we doing it, and why is there no recycling in the United States if McGinnis says that this is such a national treasure? Number one, the way there are a number of countries that are reprocessing today, France, Russia, Japan, China, and others. They're all using a very arcane process called Purex that actually, it originates from the Manhattan Project, World War II, and Oppenheimer. And that process, to this day, uses nitric acid to dissolve the nuclear fuel rods to get to a limited number of isotopes. What happens, ironically, is when you're dissolving in nitric acid, commingling with the radioactive waste, you're actually ending up with more waste than you started from, ironically, when you're extracting. We've eliminated that process. Our technology that we're in the process partnering with 4 national labs in the U.S. government eliminates the use of nitric acid. We use a superheated pyro process and then an electrolysis process. So we are able to do a dry process, and at the end of our process only have about 3 to 4% of the original high-level radioactive material. We separate out the low level. Low level is disposed of every day. I was just in Salt Lake City a couple of weeks ago. Energy Solutions is doing a fine job doing that. So that's number one. Number two, there's been a security Trojan horse in the Purex process that would make it unacceptable from a national security perspective policy to have a facility like the French and Purex, in my humble opinion, build in the U.S. because they pull out a pure stream of plutonium. After all, that's the reason why President Carter put a moratoria, a ban on reprocessing, because that technology had too much of a Trojan horse. We've eliminated that. When we pull out the plutonium, we co-extract it with self-protecting radioisotopes that offers a very, very strong built-in barrier, so one could not reasonably get to that material and use it for nefarious reasons. The last reason why you don't see reprocessing in this country, I would argue, is because all the reprocessing plants around the world, they're all state-owned. They are not set up for economic efficiency, minimum overhead, maximum ROI. So that is one of our opportunities as a private sector company. We came in and we brought in the state-of-the-art tech, modularity. You can see that silver tri-vessel system. That's one of our modules. We'll have 10 of those, each one processing about 400 metric tons a year efficiently. To give you a context of that facility, which will be about 4,000 metric tons when all said and done, but compact, the size of a state-of-the-art nuclear NFL stadium, for example. And it's going to be compact, largely autonomous, but highest throughput in the world. All of the reprocessing around the world, Russia, Japan, France, China combined, it's about 2,600 metric tons a year. This plant will process 4,000. Wherever this plant is built, in whatever state, that state will become the largest clean fuel producer on the planet. Because why? Because, again, scale. We have the largest fleet in the world. We have the largest amount of so-called used nuclear or waste in the world. And so we have that opportunity, unlike any of the other countries have. This is a mining operation. That's what we're going to be doing, mining and extracting all the valuable isotopes. We already have offtake agreements and indicators for 10 different isotopes, many of them only available from Putin and Russia right now for Navy purposes, for medical purposes. And so suppliers and customers are scrambling because they don't have those isotopes. Where are those isotopes in plentiful amounts? our so-called nuclear waste. So that's our business. We're going to get into the market by mining and doing a triple bank shot, like Secretary Rick Perry, my old boss, used to say. This is going to be a triple bank shot. It's going to be good for the environment. We're going to reduce that legacy. Even, for example, in Arkansas, we can reduce it down to 4%. We're going to have a tech hub that is going to generate a lot of jobs and long-term generational jobs. And then it's going to provide energy security for this country. So that's where we're headed now. And we're scaling up. We're going to do similar to SpaceX. We're not going to go from paper design to full commercial. We are in the process of scaling it up and breaking it down with engineering feedback and going through that process of learning by doing. We're working with 4 national labs, including Idaho National Lab. At the end of next year, we will have completed a 3-year lab-scale demonstration of this novel recycling process, demonstrating that we can pull out those different isotopes, reduce down to about 4% the original high-level radioactive material, and do it efficiently without any nitric acid. We're very proud of it. We're going to have a full commercial. We're talking to different states where it's going to be. We may have 2, we may have 3, we may have a West Coast, East Coast. This facility will operate, we plan, for about 60 years. Now, our facility is pretty unique. Recycling facilities require a large workforce. In France, I believe it's at least 7,000 or 8,000, but that's an older, less efficient facility. Ours will require about over 3,000 jobs. The beauty of it is, and we're very stakeholder conscious, the beauty of it is the majority of the people that will work there are trades-based. They're going to have generational jobs. These salary jobs range from $75,000 to $125,000 a year. We're proud to be a tech corridor wherever we build. So, and this is going to be a generational tech corridor, jobs-based economy. And the last point is we're proud that we will be a major tax revenue generator. We are not looking for any tax abatements. Many companies do. We're not. We want the full benefit to go back to the community. All we need is to make sure that we find the appropriate location and that we're supported by the state. We want alignment. We want to make sure this is as much the community's owned generational asset as anyone's. So at the end of the day, we are going into the market through recycling. But then we have our advanced reactors. We have a very important announcement that's going to be coming out with our micro-reactors. And the beauty is these are recycled, fueled reactors. So they're very sustainable and very much less environmentally impactful. At the same time, a major jobs generator, long-term energy security. So that's where we are. The full suite of the tech we're bringing in. Almost all the other companies, they're going into the market, whether it's just through reactors or fuel or interim storage or waste management. We're going to offer the full integrated set of services for the customers. I'll stop there in case you have any questions. Be happy to entertain any.
Representative Ladyman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oop. Am I on? Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm over here. Well, I'm pretty excited about what you're saying, actually. And we would like that here in Arkansas. The SMRs, there's one, I got a couple of questions, and you can cut me off, Rick, if you need to, but there's a number of different types of SMRs, and a lot of people are confused about that. Mm-hmm. Can you explain a little bit about the different types? I was in Canada a few months ago, and I saw the one that GE's building in Toronto, mm-hmm. but it's more of I think a heavy water, I believe. They just downsized their typical unit. Can you kind of talk about the different types and what type you're looking at, whether it's sodium cool or?
Sure. And thank you again for your leadership in legislation. We think is very important, by the way. So essentially, for the small modular reactors, you can break it down into, most rudimentarily, light water reactor technology, where the uranium-based fuel, and it's much the same design with the reactor pressure vessels that you see in Arkansas 1 nuclear power plant. And the other light water, all the reactors are operating in this country, 94 of them, are light water pressurized reactors right now. So some of them, including GE's and NuScale and others, they are more advanced, but they're still light water reactor and they're uranium-based, which makes a big difference from requiring more mass for the uranium and to get the same amount of density. Because I'll mention our reactor, which is not using a uranium-based fuel. We're using a transuranic-based fuel, and that transuranic-based fuel that includes plutonium, but with the security wrapped around, is superior in energy density and less weight ratio. So suddenly a reactor, a microreactor that is generating 15 megawatt electric is going to be 5 times larger than our HOPE reactor, we call ours, which is a molten salt reactor with recycled fuel generating 250 megawatts of electricity, and we're going to be 1/5 the size because it's the magic of what we call the transuranic fuels, true fuel. The other types of small modular reactors, in addition to the light water reactors, small modulars, you have the non-light water reactors, including high-temperature gas reactors. You hear about the TRISO fuels, DOD, Project Pele, X-Energy, others are using the TRISO fuels. You have the sodium-cooled fast reactors, such as Bill Gates' is reactor that they're deploying in Wyoming. And then you have molten salt reactors. We chose molten salt because, first of all, it actually freezes up at about 400 degrees Fahrenheit, freezes up, relatively speaking, because we bring that salt up to a much higher temperature. So that reactor is already molten. You're never going to have a core melt because it's already in a liquid state. But it's a steady state, and it's ultra safe because it will freeze up rather than spread and contaminate. And also, our reactor is near pressure, atmosphere pressure. So what that means is you don't have to have these large reactor pressure vessels to keep in that higher pressure. And so that offers a lot of savings for costs. You don't have to spend as much money on concrete, on other materials that you would need for a much larger footprint. So we have a multiple of reactors coming into the market or attempting to. Light water and then non-light water, about 3 or 4 different classes. Ours, we're happy. We think this is going to be the future. We're just about the only one that's going to use transuranic fuels, and also the microreactors is going to make a huge difference. So energy security is huge. Russia, we're still dependent on Russia for over 20% of our enriched fuel. That's why Bill Gates had to push his reactor deployment by 2 years, because the only source of the fuel he needs, HALEU, is from Russia right now. We're scrambling in the U.S. to do this. But we're working with the Department of Energy and Congress, too, to remind them, wait a minute, we have enough fuel in our so-called waste that through one of our facilities, we can provide 40% of the U.S. annual uranium requirement, and that's not even including the transuranic fuels that we will be able to fuel up to 40 reactors. So it's a no-brainer that we have to maximize our resources. We should take in all of the above for not only for energy sources, but all of the above for maximizing what we have God-given here in this country that's sitting around these pads and unused.
Well, yeah, I appreciate you doing that because it's confusing. And I appreciate you talking about the meltdown, because that's the problem with old nuclear is meltdown. Anybody that's old enough to remember Chernobyl, and they're scared. But these units, the type that you have chosen, cannot melt down.
They will not core melt. Our reactor it's already in a liquid state. Right. And so as salt, the chemistry of salt, once it goes down about 400 degrees Fahrenheit, it freezes up like a giant block. And we've already demonstrated in reactors that it could freeze up and you can reheat it and not have irreparable damage for the reactor. So
I got one more. The question in my mind is the economics. Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, I know it's doable. Argonne Labs, Idaho Labs have worked on this and done it. So how are you handling the economics? I mean, does your company see this as an economical, ROI, or is it more R&D?
No, absolutely. It is a huge economic opportunity. The U.S. nuclear market is about a $150 billion market. We see with closing the fuel cycle, recycling, and then having the fuel coming from that, which can be much less expensive and secure supply, it could be a $1 trillion market. Our facility, I didn't mention this, the recycling facility, we project every year $4 to $6 billion in revenue. Just one isotope pulled out of that we're going to pull out carries over $1 billion a year in sales just for one isotope. You have strontium-90, cesium-137. You have some non-radioactive elements that are generated that are the most precious metals in the world. So it's a combined economic business approach that we do, sir, where it's not just deploying the reactor. We're going to get the economics because we're going to provide our own fuel. We're going to generate billions from the recycling, like a mining operation. Our facility it's going to be a tech corridor. We'll have medical isotope manufacturers. We'll have industrial. We'll have probably defense, space, all co-located to harvest and get those isotopes. So that all feeds in our view, to the reactor deployment as well. So for example, if the uranium market crashes, it's going to be a pinprick to our nuclear recycling facility because we have 9 other isotopes that are carrying some of them as much as $1 billion a year. So what we've done is de-risked. But if we're not careful, Argonne and others have looked at the pricing, but they've looked at it through the rear view mirror. And they based it on this Purex process that's state-owned. It's like trying to compare SpaceX to NASA, but not including the reusable rocket aspect. These are apples and oranges, and we're next gen, and we're very confident about the economic model that we have.
So is it true, when I was in Canada, we talked about this, and I think they might generate some of these isotopes up there with their, what they call it, Can-Air.
They certainly do. Moly-99 and others, too.
Yeah. Some of these isotopes, isn't it true that this is the only way you can get them? They're not found in... You can't mine them. You can only generate them through this process.
Exactly. That's why this used nuclear fuel, so-called waste, is so valuable and is so heartbreaking that we've never availed ourselves of it. You have isotopes that can only be gotten through the fission process. Even plutonium. Plutonium is man-made. It comes from uranium out of the ground, enriched, and then the fission process it generates as a byproduct, daughter product, plutonium. One of the most impactful energy sources you can have, density and weight. But you have other isotopes that are generated at quantities unlike anywhere else, and it's sitting in our so-called waste. So it's time to start mining those materials. The isotopes are sorely needed. Strontium-90 or krypton-85 is used to detect leaks in reactor pressure vessels. Pretty important. The only supplier in the world, Russia. Why? It's coming from their recycling plant in Mayak.
And some of those are used in the medical.
Absolutely, and medical. They're used for medical imaging.
Well, thank you for your answer. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Representative Portner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. My question is, do you have a working prototype?
We are going to have our first working prototype lab-scale demonstration in about 12 months. We've been doing it for 2 years. It's a 3-year lab-scale demonstration. And we're going to demonstrate by the end of next year with actual used nuclear fuel from Byron Nuclear Power Plant, which has already been shipped in that Idaho National Lab. Idaho National Lab is one of our lead labs, and we also have Pacific Northwest National Lab, Oak Ridge, and Sandia. And so in the next year, we will have our first demonstration. About a year later, we're going to scale up to a pilot scale where we're going to separate at the kilogram level. And about 2 years later, in 2029, we're going to have our first full commercial module. You saw the picture of the tri-vessel. We're going to have one entire 400 metric ton by 2029. So you're catching us as we're in the launch phase, if you will. But actually, that's the time to be. It's, again, like talking to SpaceX in the 2000s. The time, I think, to engage with a company like ours and partner is now. That way, like we're working with Energy Northwest, just partnered with Amazon with X Energy. We have a public-facing agreement. In fact, I'm talking to the CEO in just a few minutes after this. They've asked us to look at the feasibility of recycling their material, selling back their fuel, and then recycling potentially even the advanced reactors. So we know how to do it. We have the pathway, and we're in the scale-up right now, and we plan to do our scale-ups short of the full commercial on federal land at a national lab in partnership, which is what we're doing. 2032, that's our target for one or more of our commercial full facilities, state-of-the-art, that will be sited in one or more states. So hence the engagement with you all, hence the engagement with some of the other states. The number of employees and the economic impact will make it a regional impact in my view. In my view, when you're talking about 3,000 or 4,000 jobs, and that's not even downstream, and then the economic and supply chain impact, it's going to have a multi-state positive impact, regardless of where that facility is built.
Follow up?
Quick one.
As you're testing in the labs, and I call small scale,
Yeah.
have you included the safety? Are you checking all safety aspects as you go?
Absolutely. And remember, recycling is very different from the safety challenges of the current reactors that are light water reactors, even though those are very safely run today. So absolutely, safety and security and minimizing substantially any environmental impact. In fact, we're going to be environmentally net positive because we're going to dramatically reduce that amount of material. If we site a facility in a state like Arkansas, we definitely will prioritize recycling the material that's sitting in the pads in that state's reactor. Absolutely.
All right, next up, Senator Stubblefield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today. This has always intrigued me, this subject. We've been talking about small nuclear fission reactors for 10 years or more. I mean, it's been
Indeed.
a slow process, and I wonder just how many regulatory hurdles are we still having to cross that's slowing down this process? Because doesn't China already have one of these hooked up to the grid, SMR?
Yes, they do. They have a small modular reactor. Winston Churchill once said about the U.S., after making the wrong decision many times, they finally come to the right decision. And so for nuclear with small modular reactors, we tried over and over, and we've done it, and frankly, sometimes in a very unwise way. We're finally getting through some of the woods. Even though NuScale is having challenges, we already have our nation's first small modular reactor, light water reactor, that has a license now from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It took about 4 years, too long, too expensive, but at least we got it. We have our first research reactor at Abilene Christian University, where they've got a construction permit in 2 years and is partnered with industry. So small modular reactors, they've come a long way. It's taken too long. I was part of that, running and acting Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy for a number of years. But we're learning, and we're hitting that learning curve. But China, absolutely. They have that molten salt reactor near the Gobi Desert. They also have another small modular, but still, that's all re-engineered tech. That's tech that they got from us and the French. So I'm confident one thing is we definitely can lap them in innovation. We've just got to figure out how to take the tech to market and do it in a smart way. And I think smart way is having industry come and innovatively in partnership with state, local, and federal.
So we do get money from the DOE?
Absolutely. I actually have my company in just 3 years, 2.5 years, we already have 6 different various grants. The one that we're most proud of is the Department of Energy's ARPA-E, which is really focused on partnering with promising companies tech to market. They're funding the 80% of that lab scale demonstration I mentioned. So we're fully partnered with the federal government. You need that in the nuclear business. And I think, frankly, the optimal partnership is federal, state, and industry. Locked in, bringing in universities, bringing in local stakeholders. It's got to be a fully integrated, maximized model, in my view.
Just one more, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, go ahead.
These are these 1,000-megawatt facilities you're talking about?
The small modular reactors are up to 300 megawatt electric, and then they can be combined. Ours is 250 megawatt, but we can do a two-pack, single, two-pack, or four. So we have a balance of a plant that can add that. That's very important because with the upfront capital, we know some Vogtle and other nuclear projects, oftentimes that's the killer. Having to put billions of dollars upfront while you're not generating any money off of that equity, and then you're crossing your fingers, you're going to get that built and generating revenue before you run out of money. So modularity is important because you don't have to commit as much advanced resources. So, for example, a 250 megawatt, if I'm going in a market where I think it's going to be at least 1 to 2 gigawatts, maybe it's 5 gigawatts like Amazon needs. Let's say it's 2 gigawatts, but we're not sure if there's going to be, upon operation of the plant, if we spend billions to have a 2 megawatt plant of like 8, let's say, small modular reactors. What if the market is not there and then you're hemorrhaging money? So modularity allows you to have a plant that has a growth capacity, but you build one modular and then you wait for the market to catch up if the market is not there. Then you add another, market grows, add another. These are all de-risking aspects. So I'm very optimistic about small modular reactors, but listen, the private sector, I think it's a really good thing. It's a Darwinian, environment where it forces out the tech and the business plans that are not the best. So I don't believe you're going to see all the companies that you see now around in the next 20, 30 years, but you're going to see the ones that make it, and we intend fully to be one of those. We're going to be tried and tested and pressure tested economically, not shielded by federal government status. So I'm optimistic about small modular reactors. We'll probably need large reactors, but the small modulars can be large, and then they can be small.
Well, with the demand, with these crypto mines and
Right.
the demand of energy going to increase over and over and over, we're going to have to do something to meet the energy demand and keep our energy affordable and reliable. So
when you have these data centers and AI centers needing as much as 4 to 5 gigawatts, and if they do an agreement with existing utilities, it's academic. They're going to probably end up driving the price of electricity and make it more scarce. So we need new capacity to meet the growing need and make sure that the average residents in states don't see an escalation in their price because these giant data centers are locking in behind the fence a lot of the electricity.
All right. Representative Watson.
Thank you, Mr. McGinnis, for being here with your knowledge on nuclear. Out of curiosity, in this state of Arkansas, are there a couple of nuclear reactors being built right now? Are you aware of it?
I'm not aware of anybody actively siting and building in Arkansas. Of course, you have Arkansas Nuclear One, gives you a lot of great legacy and infrastructure, but Arkansas would be, my view, very, very attractive for small modulars. And you've got great infrastructure, you've got great transportation, and not only for reactors, but recycling. Because again, you buy a reactor or you deploy a reactor, what are you going to do with the waste? Right. And so you cannot separate the two. And you can't say the federal government is going to take care of it because they've spectacularly face-planted over decades. So we're offering a responsible, comprehensive solution with reactors and with an answer to the nuclear waste by turning it into a tech corridor.
Okay, you mentioned nuclear waste a while ago. or just then. What about, you mentioned also earlier about the nitric acid waste.
Yes.
In my terms, is that a whole lot more stable than nuclear waste in my terminology? Can you talk to me just for a second about the nitric acid waste?
Yes. So what I meant is that the process being used today for recycling around the world, they're all state-owned, they use nitric acid to dissolve the nuclear fuel that's come out of a reactor to extract. So they commingle that, and then suddenly you have more waste than you started from. Hanford Tanks in Washington State, largest nuclear cleanup project in the U.S. Where's that liquid mostly from in those tanks? Reprocessing, Purex, using nitric acid. We eliminated that. That's what we're working with the 4 national labs, and we're so excited about it. It's a dry process, and we can thermally separate out isotopes, harvest it, and then we do electrolysis without ever adding any aqueous process that generates all this waste.
Okay. One more question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
The time period, construction of a old traditional, if there's an old traditional, full-blown nuclear reactor compared to, we've been talking about the modular now. Can you give me a little bit as far as a time period as far as construction? Half the time, or just can you elaborate on that just a minute?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we have been woefully inadequate in the U.S. in being able to build in a reasonable time. We've lost our workforce know-how on building these large-scale nuclear reactors. We went so many years. So you're looking right now, ideally you should see a reactor built in about 4 years, but even the large ones. But that didn't happen in Vogtle. It took quite a bit longer. You're talking maybe 6, 7, 8 years, but we're learning. It's a painful process. Even the large reactors, I believe if someone ordered an AP1000 tomorrow, they're going to have it at, I believe, less cost, a lot of learning curve, and less time. But for the advanced reactors, that's a whole different ballgame. It depends on the size. But small modular reactors, we should be able to build them at least in 4 years. We should be able to do that, but part of it has to do with regulatory, reconstituting our supply chain. That's why it's so important to have a state that has a lot of that capability there, and that will go a long way. And also policies are very, very important, because if you have policies and regulations that are working against the project trying to go through and making it harder instead of working as a partnership, that hits the timeline, that hits the cost. So that's why it's so important when we engage in a state. It's not just a technical issue, it's not just the economics, it's the policies of that state. If they're ready for business and they're ready to work with us, from the governor, the state legislature, and down to the local communities, county, that makes all the difference in the world to a company like mine.
Thank you, Mr. McGinnis. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McGinnis, thank you for your presentation. I recently read an article about a waste site near St. Louis, and it goes back to the Manhattan Project, that they actually were enriching or extracting uranium for the first atomic bombs there in a suburb of St. Louis. It was out in the country, of course, in those days, but the city has grown. And it's a lot of problems related to the waste that is there. And of course, at that time they were trying to win the war and defeat Hitler, and so therefore, a lot of the safety we would have to have now they didn't have. But the residents are and the community is having to deal with this. Is this a kind of reactor that could be sited at a place like this and do the recycling that you described, or would it require shipping? That could they? And again, I know you don't just dig this stuff up and throw it in the back of a dump truck and haul it somewhere, but would it be something that could be safely relocated and recycled? It seems that your technology might allow us to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. All
about killing 2 birds with 1 stone. However, there are sadly, these contaminated sites from legacy projects, including what I mentioned in Washington State, and some tragically where it's still to this day, like you said, outside of Kansas City, where there needs to be just robust, vigorous remediation. We have not focused on that as far as the potential to recycle. We're focused first and foremost on the lowest hanging fruit that can have a generational impact, and that is the commercial used nuclear fuel that's sitting on over 80 different pads next to reactors. Some of these reactors are shut down, long gone, and a fence around that used nuclear fuel because the federal government failed to pick it up. So we're here to offer that answer, at least starting with the commercial used nuclear fuel, which we can have all of our nation's 90-something metric tons of material recycled in as much as 30 years and end up having about 4% left. Then you can potentially put it in boreholes 10,000 feet in the ground, 12-inch standard industry diameter, below any type of aquifer or any deposits. So we know how to do this in an environmentally sensitive way. The remediation, those other challenges are hugely important, but that's a different pathway.
And that's not lower-hanging fruit, as you described with that metaphor.
Yes.
I assume and I know that Mr. Bethel's here if I need to look around and ask him, but I presume that the storage that's at Arkansas Nuclear 1 near Russellville would fall into the category that you described as something that would be immediately available for the recycling.
Absolutely. We have an agreement with Energy Northwest Columbia Nuclear Generation Station. They have almost 2,000 metric tons of used nuclear fuel. It's about what you have right now at your site. 2,000 metric tons, and every year you're adding more. It's safely and securely stored, but right now, the federal government is nowhere to be seen, nowhere even close to fulfilling its legal statutory obligations to pick it up. And, oh, by the way, though, they already charge Arkansas ratepayers, and you have a nuclear waste fund that's almost $50 billion. That material should be put towards finding solutions for the states that made that fund possible, in my humble opinion.
Well, I tend to agree with you, and it just, as you said, a no-brainer. I think it will be, but I'm glad that we're at least looking at getting off the dime. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I could just say one other thing respectfully, in my humble opinion, this is a unique moment for states to really rightfully take leadership and benefit. The federal government doesn't have a solution right now. The best they have is interim storage, which is not a solution, and you'll have the not in my backyard coming up all over. But if a state can come up with a plan with the private sector, a real legitimate plan to have a comprehensive approach for nuclear, accessing nuclear while not generating all this waste for generations to come, with a closed fuel cycle, thoughtful like this, that's, in my view, a plan that the federal government would need yesterday, and they need a solution. So if a state comes in with a plan, and I can tell you some other states, I've spoken to the governors, and they are looking at this. They want to go to Washington. They want to say how we're going to access the waste fund, whether it's $1 billion a year for the state for every year that plant's operating, rightful access, and really come in with a plan that the federal government doesn't tell you to be force-fed and take. Come up with your plan, get in front, then you, in my view, you get the best for the residents of your state when you do that.
Thank you, Sir. I'm going to go to Representative Lynch next.
You may have already answered this question. I had to step out for just a moment, but the site requirements for a facility that you've described, how close could you put that to Little Rock or one of these cities?
Our nuclear recycling or our advanced reactor or HOPE reactor?
The reactor.
Oh, the advanced reactor, we can site it close to populations, very much so. The NuScale reactor, for example, demonstrated that it had passive safety systems. It received a license. And then TVA submitted a site for an SMR that was essentially walk-away safe. These are the next generation compared to the current light water reactors. They're designed to automatically safely shut down in an accident. What has that allowed us to do? It's allowed these companies and states to go to the NRC and say, we don't need a 10-mile evacuation, emergency management or evacuation zone because we don't have this inherently unsafe reactor or safety issues associated with other reactors. We have a walkaway safe. So we've already seen one license issued that said to the fence line. That's it. You don't need a 10-mile because that reactor is inherently safe. Our reactor is that type of reactor. So suddenly, if you have a reactor that's inherently safe, you don't need a 10-mile emergency planning zone. Suddenly, you can have a much more distributed generation network and not have to just site them in remote areas.
Okay, follow up?
Quick one.
Yes, on the recycling, could you give me the same description of where?
Right.
that'd be
In our
located?
recycling, there's no pressurized systems or anything. It's not a reactor. It's a recycling facility. It's a mining business. It's chemistry. And it's going to be ultra safe. So for the license, what we're doing is there's two entities in the federal government that has authority to license nuclear operating facilities. Not just the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but the U.S. Department of Energy. That's why we're able to do our lab scale demonstration using the authorities of the Department of Energy in partnership with them. So we plan to do our scale of facilities using DOE license authority and facilities, hopefully win-win for them and us. And our final full commercial or more than one, we will have to go certainly through the nuclear regulatory pathway. We're hoping it doesn't take more than 4 years, so we have time if we're looking at 2032. But we want to get as much of the data from our scale-up at the U.S. Department of Energy as possible before we launch and go to the NRC formally.
Thank you. Next up, we're back with Representative Ladyman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things. Senator Johnson talked, or I think he was the one mentioned the $50 billion, or you mentioned it.
Yeah.
I made 2 trips to D.C. I met with all of our congressional delegation and also members of the Senate Energy Committee. Mr. Grappay went with me from our DOE. And is that $50 billion available? I've been told, and I've looked online, that a bunch of this money is set aside for legal fees because the federal government did not meet their commitment of getting rid of the waste by a specified time. So is that money available, and is it really $50 billion, or is it reduced to like $20 billion?
It is IOU status. That's the reality. The money has been spent, but the U.S. government, the federal government, is obligated to find that money when it's decided to be allocated. So in other words, they have the scoring process, the controversial scoring process. So every time we access even $1 in my office, where we have the Yucca Mountain program and the nuclear waste program, it actually counted against our budget. Why? Because they had to come up with the money to appropriate it because they essentially already spent it. So it's an IOU status. It doesn't mean the money isn't there. It means that it's harder to get that money because it's going to score against the budget. And the tragic part is that since the Department of Energy, trust me, I have tire tracks on my back running the program, since the Department of Energy failed to start picking up the used nuclear fuel in 1997, even though we had already been collecting rate-pay fees at the tune of billions of dollars before, and continued until Obama, actually. And then the courts said enough's enough. The utilities sued the federal government. It took almost 10 years. And the courts sided with the utilities, saying you need to, federal government, stop taxing the ratepayers because you failed to deliver the service, number one. And number two, you're going to pay compensatory damage to the utilities for the cost of maintaining, including Arkansas Nuclear One's pads for that spent fuel. So right now, the federal government is spending in court-assessed fines, called the Judgment Fund, almost $1 billion a year, in addition to the Nuclear Waste Fund, right? So the taxpayer has been double hit. It's not even coming, they're not even paying it out of the nuclear waste fund. It's coming from the general treasury. And it's the largest payout of any kind going to nuclear within the judgment fund. So that's another reason why this is a problem the federal government has. And frankly, I think the only entities that's going to be able to offer that solution is state with industry partnership, because the federal government has just unfortunately demonstrated it has not solved it, and it's not positioned to solve it anytime soon.
So who controls that fund? Is it DOD or DOE?
The Energy and Water Appropriations Committee on the House and Senate, Chuck Fleischman, great chairman from Tennessee. He's very familiar with our company. He's a supporter of recycling for the Senate side, for the House side. They are the appropriations subcommittee responsible for appropriating the nuclear waste fund.
What's the name of that committee?
The House Energy and Water Development Committee, and then you have the counterpart, Senate Energy and Water Development Committee. The responsible party for paying out for the court-assessed fines, the judgment fund, is the Department of Justice and Treasury with the Department of Energy. Okay. So it really is something that it hurts the taxpayer, and we know how to solve this. We know how to recycle in an environmentally sustainable way, economic. We know how to do it. We just need to take the initiative, and our company is doing that, but we won't be able to do it, I think, without having strong partnership with the right state or states and local communities, which are our priority. The communities will own this as much as anybody, and they have to have the strongest voice. You have a facility there for 60 years. We need to engage with them early and often and have them be a part of it, in my humble opinion.
Mr. Chairman, one more follow-up. I'm done, I swear.
Make it quick, because we're running long.
Well, I'll try. You mentioned that China has one of these, maybe two, and they have a plan to build multiple ones of these quickly. This is a horse race to get this new technology out, and we're way behind, I believe, and I think we need to speed that up. But when I was in Canada at the Darlington site, they broke ground, I saw it, where they're building one, and they're going to build four. You talked to Senator Stubblefield about this a while ago, where you can build them one at a time, the market catches up, and that's the Darlington site's plan, is to build four as the need arises.
Right.
So we've got China has some, I believe Russia has some, Canada now is working on one, and I believe TVA has had meetings and talked about starting on one of the small modular reactors. Is that true? And is Japan, are they doing anything?
You know, I've been on a number of news networks on this, and Russia and China is eating our lunch in nuclear. They're dominating the global market with mostly our technology, and but we can outcompete them. Our company, we can outcompete them. But right now, it's a geostrategic play, and nuclear is a key part of it being weaponized. So I would say you've got three key political drivers to get nuclear back in a sustainable footing that a state can come with a company and solve it and offer that solution. One is the geostrategic threat from Russia and China. The implications of dominating nuclear, even to our nuke navy and others, if we lose our supply chain and infrastructure to Russia, China, it's going to be devastating long term. Secondly is energy security. What in the world are we doing still depending on foreign suppliers of our nuclear fuel? Almost 20% of our electricity is from nuclear. Virtually 100% of the uranium comes from foreign suppliers. Yes, some of them are partners, but that's not sad. We need to have our domestic supply. We have uranium mines. We have used fuel. So energy security is another big issue. And economic, that is so important. So having long-term tech, how many facilities and how many sectors can say that a 3,000-person facility, the majority of them are going to be trades-based, highly trained, $80,000 to $125,000 a year. That's giving back to the community, in my view.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I have one more request, and if you could I'm interested in the revenue streams and the breakdown of the revenue streams. I don't need it now, but if it's possible, if you could share that with with Ms. Nelson here, and she'll distribute it out to the committee to give the committee a good idea of, because I do believe that that's a very interesting point. Because it is usually the dollars and cents that hold up the recycling, because it's cheaper to dig the stuff up out of the ground than it is to recycle it.
We'd be happy to do so, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate that. And thank you for coming to committee. It was very informative.
Thank you for your hospitality.